Despite, or maybe because of, its popularity, I don't think most people really understand what made Undertale special. Yeah, the game had some emotional moments and great music, but the core of the game was subversion and attention to detail. The game hypes up Papyrus's blue attack, which at first seems simple and easy to dodge, as if it's a complete joke. Then the fight is turned on its head when he freezes your hitbox solid so that it slams to the bottom of the playfield. Suddenly the basic act of dodging, something you've been doing since the start of the game, is recontextualized, along with a musical shift on Papyrus's goofy theme tune. You're still working with the same basic gameplay concept, but you have new rules to learn that give the fight a unique vibe to it. That's the kind of game Undertale is. That's why it strikes me as interesting that Deltarune plays the way it does. Undertale's combat, played the way it was intended, was effectively a series of puzzles. You had to figure out what combination of actions, if any, would pacify your enemy while doing a small bullet hell section in between attempts. The longer you took, the more volleys of projectiles you had to go through and risk getting a game over. Usually the way you want to fight peacefully involved going through a funny, charming little sequence with the enemy as you deciphered their personality. Deltarune, on the other hand, usually gives you one or two very obvious ways of pacifying enemies. There's no long process of petting the dog boss in different ways so as to get it to trust you. The emphasis then is placed on more complex RPG mechanics that have been layered on top of the basic bullet hell sequences. Rather than sparing enemies, you can tire them out and have Ralsei cast a pacify spell. Rather than relying solely on items for healing, Ralsei can cast a heal spell at the cost of using a mana-like resource and leaving himself open to be attacked. Rather than having to restrain yourself from attacking enemies, you have to find ways of restraining Susie from attacking them before you can spare them. There are also a few bullet hell segments placed into the overworld, meaning that aspect of gameplay is no longer restricted to combat. It all creates a decently satisfying gameplay loop, but the problem is that there's a traditional gameplay loop at all, whereas Undertale prided itself on never doing the same thing twice. There's almost no moment in what we have of Deltarune so far that's comparable to Papyrus's blue attack, or the tutorial dummy coming back for round 2. Even the secret optional boss is a traditional, straightforward affair of dodge and pacify. The attention to detail is there, with the boss having different dialogue based on whether you spared or attacked him, but the gameplay subversion, which made every fight in Undertale at least a little bit special, is downplayed. The exception would be this segment in which Susie chucks Ralsei at the boss to knock its crown off, which is admittedly pretty damn funny, but it's not enough. You chuck Ralsei a few times and then it's over. The gameplay of Undertale was never complex, but its dedication to changing the rules every fight made good use of its simple, or rather malleable, mechanics. Deltarune does not. On a larger scale, this calls back to one of Undertale's biggest issues. It draws from great influences, but doesn't outshine them. The influence Undertale took from Shin Megami Tensei is noticeable, just look at Metaton, and Deltarune seems to be pulling more from SMT than ever. Basic combat emphasizes building up resources for big swing turns where you can take out multiple enemies at once, and carelessly letting a teammate go down can create a chain reaction of losses. But what it fails to do is borrow enough mechanical complexity to make combat all that interesting. The complex mechanics of SMT give even basic enemies a sense of threat. But Chapter 1 of Deltarune fails to make anything feel threatening other than its secret Ultra Boss, who still only managed to beat me once, my only game over during my playthrough. The best mechanic in Chapter 1 is having to work around Susie and save enemies from her, but that gets cut off by about halfway through. What this means is that the game has traded off unique enemy encounters and mechanics in exchange for complexity, but ended up middling in both regards as a result. And it seems like Toby is aware of that. He knows pacifism is vestigial here. He knows all you really do in pacifist combat is hit the defend button. He's mentioned both of those issues already. I hope being aware of it means he's going to improve it. Undertale also, more obviously, drew from Earthbound and Yume Nikki, but I don't believe it ever managed to be as funny as the former or as unsettling as the latter. Don't get me wrong, Undertale is a charming as hell game, and occasionally a creepy one too, but its attempt at balancing the two things ended up with neither reaching its potential. Jokes too often undercut the serious moments, and serious moments too often put a downer on all the jokes, the latter of these two issues being the bigger one. I'm just gonna come out and say it, I hate the pacifist ending of Undertale, and it's obviously the ending you're supposed to be going for. I think it's a sappy, masturbatory ode to excess and hollow sentiment. I chose not to kill Papyrus because I liked Papyrus as an individual character. He was funny, charming, and that stupid date we went on was hilarious. Not because I believe the power of love will overcome your Sephiroth goat demons who shoot rainbow lasers. And while Chapter 1 never reaches that point of excess, it shows signs that the final game will. Confronting Lancer's dad has the exact same cheesy, melodramatic feel that the final sequence of Undertale had. In my opinion, the best part of Undertale's ending sequence was the start of the Asgore fight. You go in expecting to spare him the same way you would any other encounter until he calmly, quietly slices your mercy button in half. That moment is more effective than any over-the-top sentimentality or fourth wall breaking that your rainbows can spill out. On top of that, it seems this time around that sentiment is the only choice you have. Regardless of how many creatures you murder, the ending is the same, and Toby has confirmed he has plans for the final game to only have one ending. I like the single ending idea, as I think Undertale's multiple endings led to a glut of convoluted, unnecessary lore, and I just don't like the amount of content you're discouraged from seeing, but I don't think Undertale's spare or slaughter gameplay style lends itself to singular conclusions either. All of these two games' mechanics are predicated on the concept of a moral choice with a very definitive outcome. Either a character ends up dead, or they don't. There's no mechanical or story difference here between sparing Lancer's dad or beating him in straight combat. You can either remove the sparing mechanic and focus on creating complex RPG combat, or you can commit to combat choices having weight. Keeping pacifism, but removing its weight makes it feel arbitrary. I've been pretty negative toward Deltarune in this video, but I want to clarify that all of these points are of ambiguous resolution due to the unfinished nature of the game. If one of Susie's earliest lines is to be believed, a significant theme of the game will be the meaninglessness of choice. If one of Susie's final lines is to be believed, a significant theme of the game will be that you do have to use violence every now and again. On top of that, it's too early to say that the game will be too easy or have too few unique bosses. After all, this is only Chapter 1 of a game intended to be much longer than Undertale. That's why, in spite of how negative I've been, I'm still really looking forward to the full release of Deltarune. Because what all of these choices show is that Toby is committed to shaking things up. He has no intent to milk the cash cow that is Undertale by pushing out a game with identical mechanics and ideas. He's a genuine auteur, seemingly finding it difficult to put together a development team because of his creative vision being unique to himself. And I liked Chapter 1, despite all my complaining. Honestly, at least one line of this game had me laughing so hard I was wheezing. Deltarune is, just as anyone would expect, hilarious and full of great lines. The soundtrack has some absolute jams in it, especially the main battle theme, and the visual upgrade from Undertale is unmistakable. Just compare the basic battle screen from Undertale to Deltarune and you'll understand what I mean. Susie, Lancer, and Rousey are all very likable characters who I look forward to interacting with in the full game. If there are more optional bosses like Jevil in the full game, you know I'm gonna beat them all. And you know I walked around the entire town in the ending sequence just so I could talk to every NPC and read all the flavor text. And hell, Toby himself said the game is intended for people who've already played Undertale, so maybe the lack of subversion and choice is the subversion. If Deltarune really is a survey like it says, take this from me, Toby. Do all the crazy shit I know you want to do with this game, and take all the time you need. I want to see how crazy this can get. Also, take Alphys out of the game. Fuck that character. Also, don't ever make a character that reminds me of Homestuck ever again, please.